of compliance today. We had a great podcast episode about this that was recorded this week that will come out on our compliance podcast next week. But we essentially get this question all the time. Are predictive dialers or auto dialers compliant or legal to use in higher education? And this may be a novel, idea or a new concept, or maybe you've never heard of this technology, or you may be very familiar with this technology and feel a very certain way about it. So I'll make it easy. I'll start with the answers to the question, and then we can kind of unwrap it a little bit. I'd say listen to the podcast episode, a lot of detail in there, and then we also have an article that will come out next week specific to this topic. I think what's confusing to people is that inside of higher education, there's actually very little guidance or policy or regulation around the use of auto dialing technology. There is case law. There's a lot of lawsuits brought against colleges and universities for using robo-dialers, auto dialers, and predictive dialers. In my experience from all the case law I've read, I'm not saying there isn't one, but I have not seen a case where the person that brought the lawsuit against the college, won it or won the case. I think most have either been settled or have been tried for the university or college, at least the ones that I'm specifically aware of. But let's answer the question first, right? So, because it's pretty easy and we've done a lot of work on this, and the answer is yes, it is legal and compliant to use auto dialers and predictive dialers in higher education. There is enough precedent and language to assume that robo dialers are not, or robocalls are not, and I'll explain the difference between the three in this live session. But so yes, it is compliant. It is legal. Where you get in trouble is essentially not following TCPA regulations when utilizing this technology, and that's where most of these lawsuits come from. And there's an update to TCPA regulations a while ago that essentially removed higher education institutions, colleges, and universities from its safe harbor. So there used to be kind of language in there that said you can't sue a college or university for violating rules that pertain to TCPA or just robo-dialing, predictive dialing, and auto dialing. That's no longer the case. So if you break TCPA regulations for predictive and auto dialing and robo dialing, two things can happen. You are open to a lawsuit, and there is a fee of $1,500 per call violation that you open yourself up to. So for a lot of colleges and universities, that risk is not worth it. My opinion on it is, if you understand the regulations, it's actually a technology that can build great efficiencies in your processes and provide a much better student experience and staff experience. So I'll talk about that a little bit, but again, the podcast article that we have coming out is definitely a much more detailed analysis of this. So an auto dialer is the easiest kind of technology to understand. It's been around for a while, but an auto dialer is essentially software. You feed it a list or a set of contacts from a system, and it just kind of auto dials through the numbers for you, so that a staff member doesn't have to physically either click every single contact to dial or manually input the number to dial it. So that technology has been around for quite a while. Auto dialing can be used in a bunch of different facets of higher education. It can be used in the admissions office. It can be used to get a hold of students who are interested in your programs. It can be used in advisory, to outbound prospect students to help them plan, whether they're incoming freshmen or new students, or students that are essentially going on to their second, third, or fourth year of graduate school. It's used in financial services for collections, tuition, billing, all the above. It can be used, on the alumni side, post-graduation, to raise funds or money, and things of that nature. So there's a lot of different use cases for the technology. Auto dialers are probably not as popular as predictive dialing technology. So to understand an auto dialer, you essentially can buy it within your phone system, or within your CRM, or within your student information system, or as an outside app that lives on top of your tech stack. And you set configurations for when it auto dials through a list or a set of records, or how many dials at a time, how many dials per day, and it makes those dials for you. And as the system is dialing students or prospective students and a person answers the phone, it will then warm connect or transfer that person to one of your staff members. That way your staff member doesn't have to sit there and essentially dial through a list or a set of students or a group of students. Predictive dialing technology is actually awesome. Predictive dialers use algorithms to identify who to call, when to call them, whether they're going to answer, and there's a suite of technology attached to those applications that have even just, greater tech that allows for higher deliverability of calls. So using a predictive dialer is similar to an auto dialer with a lot better features that I believe allow colleges and universities to be much more efficient in reaching their students and allow for a much better student experience. So one of the cool features of a predictive dialer, a little scary if you're afraid of this stuff, but I think it's great. It can tell when the person you're trying to call is most likely to actually answer the phone, and will only attempt to call them during that time. So imagine the life of your student and not being bothered or prospected or called during a not optimum time, but attempted during a time that they're most likely to answer. Creates for a much better experience. There is a lot of different features that you can add on, like call masking, which is essentially, instead of seeing my phone number, you would see a phone number that's more likely linked to the area that you're from. So maybe you are a university in California and you have students in New York. So when your staff are calling students in New York, they see a New York area code, so they're more likely to answer. It's very difficult to get a hold of students. I think everybody recognizes that, right? But predictive dialing technology is also pretty cool because it allows you to customize settings that help you stay compliant within TCPA regulations, and I'll talk about that to close out this live session here in a little bit. In terms of robo-dialing, so robo-dialing is when you have an auto dialer or a predictive dialer that's making dials on your behalf, and when a contact occurs, the student, the prospective student, or the active student, or the alumni, when they answer, they hear a pre-recorded message. That's why it's called a robot. Or you have it tied into like an AI or a pre-recorded kind of set of options through a phone tree. Essentially, they never were meant to communicate with a human, right? So you use the technology to communicate with somebody without the intent of connecting voice to voice to provide a service or answer questions. There's not a rule or law that says robocalling is non-compliant or illegal in higher education. There's just enough case law and or citation or communication that can be vague in nature that would urge higher education institutions not to use robocalling and communicate with prospective active students or graduates. So I'll leave that alone. All right, how do you not get in trouble using this technology? And again, I would recommend predictive dialers. It's pretty straightforward. So TCPA regulations require you to alert prospective students, active students, or alumni and graduates that you are going to use this technology to communicate with them. Misconception is that you have to do this on initial opt-in or the first interaction with the university. That's not the case. You definitely should. So you should have proper disclosures on all your requests for information forms and all of your applications and all things of that nature that say, hey, we may attempt to contact you using predictive dialing or auto dialing technology. But you can actually do it after the fact. So in orientation, via text message, you can text your students and ask them to opt into this method of communication. An email on your student portal and follow up, right? There's a bunch of different ways to kind of gain opt-in to do so. You cannot use the technology though without prior written consent, and opt-in is essentially written consent. If you do and you are caught, it is $1,500 per violation. So that's every call. It could be 10 calls to one student. That's 1,500 times those 10 calls. So that's why there's a little bit of clout or darkness or scariness around this topic. And in higher education specifically. So that's number one. Number two, the language is not really that clear, but you have to maintain essentially the understanding with your prospective or students or graduates that you are using auto dialing technology or predictive dialing technology. So you can't just get opt-in and never tell them again. There's a bunch of ways you can do this. Some schools and colleges, when the student calls in or when you call them, there's a recorded message that tells them that that's happening. Some universities will send out like a text or an email quarterly or every semester or once a year or every 6 months that essentially just recertifies opt-in on all methods of communication with their students. There's a bunch of different ways you can do it, right? You cannot use auto dialing and predictive dialing technology outside of certain hours, and it's 8 to 9 p.m. So it's 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. in that student's time zone. You can't call before 8 a.m. using this technology, and you can't call after 9 p.m. using this technology. So alerts is kind of where schools get in trouble. So they'll use the technology to essentially get a hold of students, active students or something of that nature after 9 p.m. and they don't have opt-in on everyone in their population. You are actually in violation of TCPA at that point. So that's an interesting, construct there. There is not strict guidelines or rules or regulations about how many times you can attempt a student via this technology per day. There's language that essentially says you can't be predatory in nature. Internally, when we're working with colleges and universities, we define that as 3 attempts per day. So anytime we're helping a school or university or college set this technology up, we set their settings to not attempt a student more than 3 times per day, which is a lot anyways. So that's kind of it. Check out the podcast that's coming out about this specific topic, or download the article that we'll put out next week if you're interested in it. If you need help or you want further guidance, you can DM me specifically or reach out to anybody on our team. We'd be more than happy to help you kind of learn a little bit more about this area, because it is a little